Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This video is called Journey Train Part 2 by the author Alecia Agard. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more exciting Journey Train videos. Meanwhile, Linda remains mystified as she absorbs the fresh, cool breeze blowing in her hair and smells the fresh green grass that surrounds her. She then notices the tall trees with their bright coloured leaves. Her eyes are then fixed on beautiful, bright flowers. She watches as the petals transforms into beautiful butterflies. Each of the petals on the beautiful coloured flowers transform into beautiful creatures. Suddenly, there is a flutter and butterflies ascend into the skies, and then they disappear into the clouds. Then there is another flutter. More extravagant butterflies emerge into the skies. The sound of fluttering butterflies can no longer be heard. Instead, there is a sound of prominent squawking as beautiful birds fill the skies. Further afield, a gigantic bird with huge wings and a long beak positions himself on the grass. He is then joined by other gigantic birds of the same species. A short distance away, another type of bird begin to emerge. These birds look fierce and resemble gigantic bats. The two types of birds fly rapidly towards each other. Loud sounds of flapping, screeching and squawking can be heard throughout the fields. The aftermath sees injured birds laying in the fields, whilst victorious birds flee the scene. The field remains silent once more. Linda and Scott sit watching the birds until Scott is alerted by a noise. This is the sound of gigantic bumblebees gathering further afield. They have smelt the blood of Linda and Scott and are now racing frantically towards them. Scott lifted his head and was terrified of what was coming towards them. "Mom, look!" Scott shouted. Linda noticed the bees coming towards them. "Get in the car!" she shouted. They both raced for the broken down car. Linda tried to wind the window up. "Wind the window up, Mum!" Scott shouted. But Linda noticed the window was jammed. A gigantic bee flew inside the window and started tormenting them. Linda reached for her bag. Linda and Scott screamed frantically, trying to avoid the bee. Linda threw her bag forcefully at the bee, which resulted in spores of fungi being splurted everywhere. Linda then pushed the remains of the bee through the gap in the window. She was relieved when she tried to wind the window up again, and this time it worked. Linda remained shaken by her ordeal whilst she cleaned the resilient green fluid from her hands. Scott was surprised at his mother's bravery. He continued to peer at the bees outside. He then turned to his mother and said, "Mum, where are we?" Linda looked at him and said, "I don't know where this place is, Scott. I don't know," she said. Scott continued to focus on the gigantic bees as they flew between the tall trees. Scott was alerted by a building in the far distance. "There is a building over there, Mum," he shouted. Linda looked and said, "We must find out what that building is." After the entire bees had disappeared, Linda and Scott walked vigilantly towards the building. They were walking for a while when suddenly the entire skies turned grey, and a crack of lightning divided the skies. A ball of cloud fell on the grass in front of them. Linda and Scott were perplexed at what they had just witnessed. Then suddenly the cloud transformed into a man wearing a black cape and a black pointed hat. The man stood in silence for a while. His eyes were focused on the clouds ahead of him. On noticing Linda, he walked slowly towards her. He reached for her hand, then stepped back and bowed stylishly. He stepped back from her, then closed his eyes as if he was reading her thoughts. He then walked towards her. Scott became fearful. "Agard, Agard," he shouted. Whilst opening his cape, he retrieved a wand which he pointed at the open space. Then the grass began to blaze wildly. He continued to wave his wand. Linda and Scott rushed away from the fire where the intense heat was choking them. She waited for the wizard to put out the fire, but then, miraculously, the fire began to form into a lake, a beautiful lake that changed to every colour of the rainbow. Then, on the surface emerged a large glass box. Inside was a woman banging on the glass. The angry wizard pointed his wand and shouted, "Alcatraz, Alcatraz, be gone!" Then everything disappeared, and the fields appeared calm once more. The wizard then laughed loudly and shouted, "Be gone, be gone!" And then he turned to Linda and said, "That was my adulterous wife. The wizard then walked towards a small boat. He then turned and signalled to Linda, "Come, come." Linda was frightened, but decided to follow him onto the boat.